What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We popped in today on a weekend day to spray black and black out these sort of simple outside corner pieces that, sorry, looking for a way to hold this, that are going to stay here for the most part. This is some of the things that create levels for us to keep students, though in their arrangement on the floor, they're closer than 6 feet. Their faces are still 6 feet or greater apart for social distancing here as we hopefully come in for a landing with people getting vaccines and stuff on the pandemic. But it also is a fundamentally important aspect to not just leave everybody on the same level on a stage if you can help it. Levels, variety of levels, various elevations are important. So at this point, there's a chair that, the show uses chairs, and almost every character sort of has a chair that goes along with them, or at least complements their wardrobe, or vice versa. But there'll be one of these interesting chairs sitting here, but someone can run up and hop up the chair and sit at this level, and then someone standing, and they still have a variety of different elevations between the two heads, and then obviously the people on the floor. And we may use one of these other boxes here in there just to get people different levels. Once again, the center is going to be, I'm sick of kicking through you, fucking cup. The center is going to be this box here, which is sort of low, and the shape that we end up with is a sort of a dip. Things swing up visually on the outside and are low lying in the center, which is kind of cool. And so these all needed to just basically be flat black, and my nice Graco Ultra Max made short work of that. Love this thing. It does have a finite life that it lives before you have to rebuild or replace the compressor on it, because it pumps thousands of psi. I want to say a couple thousand psi. But especially because of the tip I used was coming up on 14-inch wide spread, I had an easy time of just painting this all. And normally when you give the kids, this is kid work, we call it, when students are coming through in the few weeks leading up to the show and looking for something to help, they can paint things black. There's always things to black out. But the thing is, we've got half a dozen or more gallons of black paint that are all just a little bit different manufacturer, different black, some are 27 years old and some are 2, and everything in between. So, and then they sit and they just, brush and chat and brush and chat and brush and chat and brush and chat. And by the end of the period, for 40 minutes, they've got a square foot painted maybe. And half the time somebody's got a dark gray instead of black, and it needs to be painted over anyway. So long story short, this is the easiest way to do this. We still have to roll the floor black, but I think we're going to take it easy on that and try to push it to the end to where band and chorus isn't coming in here anymore, and rehearsals are being done in the appropriate footwear, and just try and get ahead of painting and repainting that. Now, that being said, we can look at, these are all just sort of rectangular prisms, and now that they've been painted the same color, you can kind of see issues, maybe if I turn the flash on, with quality here, or, lack of quality. Just constructing a box is this is actually not bad for what it is, but constructing a rectangular prism out of plywood material is a challenge. And we've got things here from various, that are various ages, some of the stuff I've built, but here's an example here of a kind of an issue. We just haven't got what we want for quality, and it's just because people are trying to anchor into the edge of things. And so it got me thinking, how am I building all these rectangular prisms for the show and keeping them looking real nice? There's just a lot of high-level construction to that, and this is where I start laughing at people who are picking through the stack of 2x4s at the lumber store, kind of complaining about how they're all warped and they're all twisted. Well, you're not going to find very many that are absolutely perfectly straight, and we looked at earlier in this series, what I do to try to identify them. And when I've got a curly section or a section that's kind of twisted, sometimes it makes good short pieces because it's lost in the shuffle there when you cut the length down. But other times you can use it for this, you can use it for that. But really, I try to identify the best specimens to construct our rectangular prisms out of, but you still end up with trouble. And so, I put the kids on, this is an easy task, make these wall sections for me, which is the 2 10-foot pieces, all these cripples or whatever, the studs in there that are of a certain length, all manufactured on the miter saw, and these blocks that jump between the 2 pieces that create the rectangle. That's basically a wall section, a ladder or a rake or whatever you want to call it. This is as well. And we've just jumped across to it in a couple places in the middle and at the outside 4 corners, and it creates our framed rectangle that we can slap some, plywood on there. Does it sit flat on the floor? No, you know, it rocks around. Does it look nice and straight as it goes? It's hard to see here because of the lens, but it twists to the left here clearly. And I don't know if you can see it maybe in the gap. No, that parallax is just makes everything I do look perfect. That's why I like this setting on the camera. If I go to this, does it change things? Yeah, see, that's ordinary cell phone. Boring. Anyway, you can kind of see it there, right? It's just not perfect. How are we going to make it perfect? We're going to use the plywood to our advantage. To start with, I went down and I made the pieces on the table saw, and they're factory length to start with, so that the end to the side is generally perfectly square, and they are essentially the same width the whole way down because they were created on the table saw, and they're going to be applied to this surface in sort of, you know, as we go in a certain order. So to start with, I screwed this wall to the floor to use this as like a fabricating table. It's not going anywhere here, okay? Then I screwed this wall to the floor so that the end of it is perfectly flush to the end of this wall here. So I'm sure that those two surfaces are flat, and I know because of the lengths of these and the way that these were assembled that they're the exact same distance from one another all the way down, and that the pieces they were made out of were manufactured to be all the same. So when you suck everything down tightly with screws, it's the same width here because it's stopped on the ends of all those sticks. And when it was set together and constructed here, the end that was of a certain distance, you know, a certain length here, is flush with the last position here. So everything was made to be as close to perfect as possible and assembled to be as close to perfect as possible. But there still are a lot of degrees of freedom. You know, you can get things to creak and groan as you move them. Maybe I can get this to do that. You know, you hear, you see all that wiggle that I can get is out of each one of these connections. You know, having long lever arms and a very small, relatively small surface where they engage. So there's, you know, degrees of freedom there to a slight degree. And when you add them all together, you get idiosyncrasies and trouble and problems. So if I started here, now I applied, I screwed this down, and I set the edge of my 24-inch piece of plywood rip on the floor there. And so it's basically working out flush here at the top. And then I flushed it up here, and I screwed in. But as you go down here, look at that. It's sticking out. Now, if I'm going to try and set this thing on its end and move it around and shuffle it into position and shuffle it back for filming, this is going to be getting caught and ripped and torn. It's sticking past like 1/4 of an inch. Now, what can I do about that? It's not screw this all on and then trim that little piece off. That's the sort of solution that you see a lot around here, but it creates a bunch of wonky trash pieces that don't sit square and flat and that you can't work to because they don't represent what they appear to represent, which is a finite rectangular prism. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this whole framed side that has all these sticks on it, that has this piece of plywood stuck to it with just one screw at the top at a corner that I know it's nice and flush at that corner, and it's flush across the top here. But I think that this frame and all the sticks in it is racked that way. I think that it's basically doing that, right? Because this is exaggerated, but I've anchored my pieces across. Piece is the perfect height here. It's the exact same height as this thing is, and it's sitting on it at that corner, and it's stuck to the floor just like the piece is. And so if I slide the top of that frame that direction, it's going to take that corner and straighten it out. And every time I move it that way, it's going to bring that lower corner closer to this corner here. And so what I'm thinking is if I just bop, I would call it, just tap on the top corner and send it that way, I'm going to watch that corner that overhangs down there sneak up to flush. That's my inclination. And I can overdo this too. But if I just kick this here, maybe you can watch it. You see that? I don't know if I can get that to, maybe I can set the camera there. Ooh. More pedantry. See? See that? I've actually overdone it a little bit. So we'll come down here and we'll just send it back. And I can watch the gap here actually. I'll overdo this just so you can watch it. Just so you can watch it go. Let's see if I do this. Camera's moving. This is a really high production value channel, folks. See that there? All right, then we can do it back. Until we have what we want. Yes. And now, now that it's just the way that we want it to be, and we can get to a point where everything works out because, of course, we've made all the bones of the sticks here of perfect length. So once they've been assembled, that group can be manipulated to meet the specifications of a perfect rectangle with 90-degree sides under certain circumstances. And actually, as you start to lock these things up, it gets easier and easier, and you find the last piece that goes on basically can only fit up and exist in a perfect orientation because you've basically constrained and controlled the structure all the way down to the final piece. And so in screwing to the floor and leaving myself these degrees of freedom and just being screwed in here, now I'm flush there, and I'm really liking this. Again, it's a flush all the way across the top here, and it's certainly flush with that other stick on the floor down there because it's been screwed to the floor, and this is edges sitting on the floor. And now I'll commence to attaching that, and that'll be really nice. And the last thing is, while it's sitting here, is I'll apply this piece to the top, and I'll take care of attaching it so that it's not hanging off here or there. And what I can do about that is I can lean into the top of this here, I can pull it toward myself and away, and sometimes I can get a hold of it with a strap, like a ratchet strap, and go to something else and just ratchet a little bit to get it to twist or manipulate it one way or another. I may need to do that as these two systems come toward me. They may wander to one side or the other, and I'll just take a ratchet to them and just, and I'm exaggerating, but I'll drag them over until the edges of the plywood line up with the edges of the framing, and I'll know that when I attach that down, I continue to work toward a more perfect rectangular prism. And then in the end, they'll stand on the flat floor for you and go right up in the air, basically, plumb, very close. You certainly won't be fighting with it. And I need it here to work out, so that a 2-inch reveal is happening, and I can kind of dial that in, and then when I attach this to that, I can control that even further, and we just continue to define these things and are using our attachment in a way to help us gain quality and perfection, and we work through that process from beginning to end. And the last piece of the puzzle here is the idea that this is supposed to be 24 inches square, but the fact is, if you look at it, how do we do this here? We have, the two pieces that are stuck to the floor, 2x4s as you look at them here. Not sure if you can see these, right? Okay. And then you've got the sticks that hold them together that are 24 inches long, and then the other ends of the other 2x4s that run across the top here, like that. And then we put our 24-inch pieces on here, and we've applied the one, and now we're talking about applying the other one there, with the 24-inch piece there. But now look what we've got here. We've got 24 inches, and we've got plus the thickness of the plywood here, and plus the thickness of the plywood there. So the way that I'm going to add the last two, and I've made these on the table saw, like I said, at 24 for the two opposing sides of these columns, but for the top and the bottom, or however you want to look at it here, I will be applying an overly large rip. They don't need to be wasteful, but it's basically going to hang off on both sides. Okay, in terms of placing it there. And when I put it on here, I'm going to justify it to one side and leave all of, it's a bigger piece. I'll justify it to one side flush and attach it, and then I'll attach the other side, and then I'll come through here with the following bit on the router, on the trim router, and that's what gives me these surfaces here. That's how I did these. But in following this with the trim router, the end of the sheet is perfectly smooth and flush to the outside of this. So right, in the end, this ends up being basically 24.5 inches or whatever these are, if they're true 1/4 inch or what have you. But this is how we get from the beginning to the end, and we end up having a monolith that measures out correctly. And of course, we could shorten these sticks by 1/2 inch or whatever we needed to shorten them by and set this that much smaller, so when it was completely clad, it measured out at a perfect 24 inches square. But I had students construct these, and when you start asking somebody to make 23.5 inch pieces here, because we're making a 24 inch total thing, and I was coming and going, and I basically left them drawings, which is what I like to do. Some of these kids are going to go on and work as engineers or go into engineering in school, and they're going to need to say that they've been given drawings, shop drawings, and built things from them. And of course, these aren't the most sophisticated drawings in the world, but I gave them this to work from. And again, if you start throwing them curveballs, they're going to understand it in the end, but the potential for mistakes is rather great, and there's no reason for us to have absolutely perfect 24 inch by 24 inch rectangular prisms around here. These will be just fine that they're 24 by 24.5. But I wanted to point that out. It's worth having this level of dedication to the construction, because the more time you spend to set these up, square them up, and do all of this, the faster the process goes from beginning to end. If you chase the problems that it's got and make changes like I proposed, cutting this to fit that and stuff as you go, you just keep creating more and more problems and more problems. You get all done, you try and stand it up and it won't stand up straight. And then you got to shim it, or there's a gap on one side or some such thing, and it just keeps going and going and going. It's making an investment in the beginning to make all these pieces on the saw and make sure they all work out to be the same, to meticulously measure them, to assemble them perfectly and keep the edges of them, flush. And it's knowing what you need to watch out for now and what you'll be watching out for in the next step. Not watching out for all of these things in the very first step. It's knowing what you need to do now while you've got what you've got in front of you and moving along, keeping, track of everything from beginning to end, and knowing that methodology. And that's actually something that can be applied to a lot of things. This is very simple here. I wanted to show it for that reason, but in the end you can apply this type of thinking to basically anything that you're working on, and you'll end up being more successful with it. And that's why some of my stuff comes out looking real nice and square and crisp and true and accurate, as opposed to some of the things that are rattling around here. It's not because people don't have the tool skills or the assembly skills or the want or the need to jump in and do it. They just haven't ever thought critically about how to control something from beginning to end. And so that's what I would hope to share with you here now. And when we come back, we'll have even more progress on the actual set itself. These pieces are going to be important to creating a sort of what feels like a really tall building, given the way that it's constructed at the ground level. But obviously we don't have to go up in there to achieve that. It's just a matter of what our forms are around by the doors. So come back and check that out when we're all done.